Identity is a project that explores the stories of significance in our region. It talks about what is unique and iconic in each community and the museum collections that they hold. This project has been worked together in partnership with 5 volunteer museums. These museums are the Corowa Federation Museum, the Yarrawonga Mulwala Pioneer Museum, the Gindra Pioneer Museum, the Hedley Taylor Blacksmith Shop and Museum, and finally the Holbrook Submarine Museum. We've worked together to bring this project to fruition and put on exhibit the wonderful collection that you see before us. Within each location there is that unique identity. Corowa explores the story of federation and that wonderful collaborative spirit around the turn of the century. Hedley Taylor and the Blacksmith Shop explores that unique invention of the header and how the Sunshine Harvester was built and then exported internationally. The Gindra Pioneer Museum, they explore their German history and also the beginnings of the Wagner store, which you can still visit today. We also have the Yarrawonga Mulwala Pioneer Museum. They look at their rich aviation history and how their collection can actually literally take flight. And finally, the Holbrook Submarine Museum, which has its own iconic, unique story that brings a submarine to the middle of outback New South Wales. We hope you enjoy these stories and the identity that it brings to our region.
We focus essentially half of our space on the story of Federation. Corowa is known as the birthplace of Federation, and so we have an extensive timeline and display relating to that.
Our displays vary. We have, if you like, different audiences. Those people who come from outside of Corowa, they generally are looking for things they've already heard about, and the birthplace of Federation is outstanding on that score.
The role of Corowa in the Federation process is very significant, so that almost half the museum is devoted to the Federation story, and they have some very, very nice objects in their collection that tell that story.
The social history aspect that we have in this museum, we have a lot of things. People come in and they recognise either from their childhood or grandparents' homes and things like that. It helps make a connection to the past, but then people will bring their children as well to learn about what happened when they were little as well.
We have what I referred to it as, if you like, nostalgia lane. We start off with the kitchen and all that used to be there, and that is probably the #1 attraction of the ladies. They see the ironing and so on. But when you move along, we have a children's section where we have bassinets and cradles, and moving down further we have a collection of entertainment items ranging from musical instruments through to television and different radios and so on.
I think it's fantastic for any city to have a collection, but Corowa especially, because a lot of these families have been here since settlement, pretty much farming families, and so to come here they can see what their grandfather or great-grandfather had on their farm, or even today are still using on their farms.
Yarrawonga and Mulwala are constantly growing, the population's going up all the time. So I think it's really up to us to preserve the past, and this is one way that we can do it.
Probably the main display is the aeroplane over here, but there's a lot of older farm machinery.
So pioneer aviation in Australia is expressed in that museum, but it's also linked with pioneer agriculture because Douglas Sloan built the biplane in the Mulwala woolshed.
Designed his own plane, and then he designed his own engine. We have here Doug's little personal notebook on some of his engine and plane designs. There's a plane design there. He had probably about 1912 vintage.
I often wonder just what Douglas Sloan might have achieved if he'd returned from the First World War, because he obviously had a great idea of how an aeroplane, he'd never seen an aeroplane and yet he built one.
He was determined, had no information, mainly just watching the eagles. How this plane here is based on the design of an eagle.
It's a very diverse collection and very strongly connected to its community.
In some cases, people do find that there's a connection to some members of their family. They perhaps see a photo or they see a reference to some family name.
I always find people come in and they walk around and they come back and they're amazed just at what the collection is here, how much stuff there is.
I do the cataloguing and I'm just about up to 3,500 items.
It's quite a collection and it's very varied and covers most of the history of Yarrawonga and Mulwala.
The idea behind preserving the museum was not just as part of family history and local history. It was really to show people what Gindra was like in the early days, to keep all these items in the community. And we've got a great little museum here. It's very, very different to what you would see in a metropolitan area. And there's stories behind everything.
What Gindra is talking about is a story of a particularly German settlement in this area.
We get lots of people in here that are looking for their family history. So, there's still some German families, original ones, in the district.
There's some very, very interesting objects in the museum itself, including, to my astonishment, 2 pairs of portraits of King Edward VII and Queen Alexandra, the King of the British Empire, and his wife, and the Kaiser and the Kaiserin. I can't think of any place anywhere where you would get that juxtaposition of portraits of the 2 monarchs who were basically, whose countries would later go to war.
When you first walk in, you walk into a general store. On one side there are the groceries set out with the large biscuit tins and tea tins, large bins for bulk goods, and on the other side there is drapery with the materials. We also have china and kitchenwares and things like that.
When the museum was opened in '68, there's one cabinet at the end of the counter that has the merchandise that was still left here when it was closed. So there are the bone buttons, not the plastic ones, but actually made of bone. Now the original shop, which is part of this complex, was built in 1874. Mr. Rosler was a very frugal man, and the lining of the ceiling of the shop is of packing cases.
The store operated right up until the 1950s. Obviously, things had changed was easier for people to drive into Albury to get their groceries. The small village, you know, your butcher and your baker and everything closed because you could get all those services in town.
The museum here is the Hedley Taylor Header Museum, and there's two main items. One is the reconstructed header, which is right here, and the blacksmith shop. We've focused on these two items as the most important in telling the story about Hedley Taylor and what he has contributed to agriculture in Australia.
The Hedley Taylor header is a significant agricultural invention that was invented in Henty by Hedley Taylor.
Henty is known as the home of the header, and also many of the local industries use the header as part of their heritage, and the Henty Machinery Field Days have a strong relationship with the header. Hedley is my great uncle, and my grandfather settled the farm right next door to where Hedley built the header. Hedley was a very prolific inventor of agricultural machinery. His first invention was the header. Then he went on to develop many more refinements for the header. The second major invention was the auto header in 1924, which went on to become the basis of modern day headers. Principles are still the same. This is the most important contribution to the grain industry in Australia. Once they could harvest these crops and harvest them fairly quickly compared to what the stripper could do, it was the start of bulk handling, and then it led to the export-based industry that we have in Australia today.
Holbrook is known as the town with the submarine, and what it talks about is the life of a submariner. What it's like to be a submariner, what it's like to go underwater, what mechanisms are used to sustain life in a submarine, what it's like living in those cramped conditions, what sort of camaraderie is developed amongst submariners as a result of their very different type of naval service. So that's one of the stories in Holbrook. The other story is the story of Holbrook, the man who gave his name to the town.
It tells the story of Holbrook, the township. It tells the story of Commander Norman Holbrook and his gallant deeds in the Dardanelles during the First World War and his crew. His name came to be bestowed on the town when anti-German feeling was rising during World War I. The place was called Germantown. This clearly had to go.
People did not want to have the town called Germantown. So they had a vote, and they found out about Norman Holbrook and his run up into the Dardanelles. He got up into the Dardanelles through a minefield, sunk a battleship on one of the earliest submarines ever made, and got them out in one piece, and was awarded the first Submariners Victoria Cross.
Holbrook's links with the Navy began during the First World War when the town was renamed in honour of heroic submarine commander Norman Holbrook. The Otway was later brought to the town in continuation of the theme, and fittingly Commander Holbrook's wife Gundula was on hand to officially dedicate the sub.
I really feel this is more my town than ever before. Thank you very much for everything.
The formal proceedings dedicated the Otway to all submariners, past, present and future.
It's hugely important to have the submarine here. Number one, of course, is tourism. You know, this submarine has put Holbrook on the map all over the world now. But number two is also for our submarine heritage, for submariners like myself and all the veteran submariners and all the serving submariners. We are the only submarine museum in Australia. Generally speaking, the everyday veteran submariner has given their artefacts to this museum, which, you know, I treat with the highest of respect.
The Identity Project has been brought to fruition working collaboratively with 5 stakeholders. They are Museums and Galleries New South Wales with Arts New South Wales funding, Albury City, Corowa Shire Council, Greater Hume Shire Council and Murray Arts.